Hi there, I'm Anthony McMahon from the IT Psychiatrist, and welcome to another episode of BizBytes Live. This is a follow-on from my video this morning around Zoom and some of the tips on how to use Zoom. I'm just going to provide a quick walkthrough of the different tips I provided, how to set them up. What's important to note is that some of these settings are actually at a global level, which means that an administrator can set them and they apply to everyone in the organization. Some of them can be done meeting by meeting. So if an administrator hasn't applied the global settings, you can choose to do it per meeting. And there's a couple which are in meeting only. I'm going to very quickly start. I've got a couple of things running here, which I want to share with you from my screen. So the first tip I provided was around the ability to have a secure password on your meeting. Now, over the weekend, today being the 7th, on the 5th, Zoom actually made passwords by default. They switched it on by default for everyone. And that was to avoid some of the security risks we've seen with so-called Zoom bombing, where people are joining meetings that they weren't actually invited to. So there's a default password that Zoom puts in there, which is sent out to all participants in a meeting when they send the invite. And it's a 6-character digit default, but you can actually change that to anything you want to make it as secure as possible, up to a limitation, the limitation there being 10 characters. You can have any symbols in there, and you can change it as you want. Now, the value of having moving away from the default password here is that if you have an insecure password, it's easy enough for other people to get into. So if you're trying to run a secure meeting that you've publicized or that people know about and the password's not that secure, they might still be able to get into it. Additionally to this, when you set up a meeting, either in the client, which I'm not using for this chat, or in the web browser, which I am, you can either set it to personal meeting or generate automatically. Now, the difference here, a personal meeting, every account has its own personal ID, which you can just quickly stand up a meeting versus generate automatically. Now, the difference between these two is if you're using the same personal meeting over and over again for every meeting, it becomes easy for other people to access meetings that they shouldn't when they find out that they're on. Another tip that came through was the ability to turn on enable join before host and enable meeting room. So this is one of the functions that can be done at a meeting room level if your global admin hasn't changed it. Again, Zoom has actually switched on the enable meeting room by default. So this is one that you have to be wary of. People joining your meeting will be placed into a waiting room from now. There is another function in there called enable join before host, and I'll shortly walk through the settings to show how they actually relate to each other as well. Because the waiting room can be set for 2 levels. Everyone who joins a meeting can be placed into it, or you can have it so that it defaults to only guests, people who aren't in your organization. One other safety feature or security feature is that only authenticated users can join. Now, what this means is that for people to be able to join your meeting, they have to have created a Zoom account at some point with their email and have a live Zoom account. If they don't have one, they won't be able to join. I don't turn that on because I often have a lot of people joining from outside of Zoom or have not used Zoom before, and I don't want to force them to sign up to an account just to be able to have a meeting with them. So these are the in-meeting options. Some other features in here which don't relate to security, but to just check the country you're in, you can edit the dial in zones, and I provided an earlier video on that. And you can also edit the time zone. So if you are presenting to multiple countries or multiple jurisdictions, you can have multiple dial-in points here. And what I recommend is you actually set this to your local one to be the default. It's often defaults to America. From a global perspective, there are a few settings which an administrator can control. One of the tips that I do have for every organization using Zoom is that you do define a small group of administrators. Don't give everyone full access to be able to maintain your Zoom account. And the reason being is if everyone can do it, then it defeats the purpose of putting some controls and settings in place. Now, you can find this in the Zoom web browser. Zoom, once you've logged into your account and you go into the meetings tab, so schedule a meeting or join a meeting, you'll find a menu down here, and there is account settings. So account settings, which an administrator can control. I'm not going to go into how to set up an administrator on this one, but we will talk about that in a later video, and there's some help guides out there as well. Within here, you can set the need to require a password. As I said, Zoom has turned that on by default to help alleviate some of the security concerns that we've got in place already. We can also, as I'm just scrolling through here, you can limit file transfers. So I've got this turned on at the moment, but I've limited to only a certain amount of types. What you can actually do is turn this off at a global layer for everyone who joins, so that no one can be sending malicious content through a file transfer. In addition to this as well, you can also define who can share screens. It can be host only or all participants. Now, one of the things that this is good for is that you can you don't want anyone to just be able to share their screen. You want to be able to control what content's being presented. You can nominate people within the meeting. So I'm going to set that to host only for now. I will change that if I need to for specific meetings. I'm just going to flick back to my notes because there's a couple that I need to remember. There's also an ability to remove participants from a meeting, and I won't be able to show you that in this video because I haven't got any guests on the Zoom meeting I've got set up. But within the settings here, you can turn that's off by default. So if anyone is kicked out of your meeting, you can't, they can't join back in by default, but you can turn that on. So it's a preference to have that turned off and keep to the default. And the reason being is if you're kicking someone out of a meeting, there's a reason why you're asking them to leave. If someone leaves on their own accord and wants to rejoin later, that's different. But if you're actually ejecting someone from a meeting, you probably don't want them back in. Now, the other two tips, which are actually in call, are within the Zoom browser itself. So this is a call that I've set up earlier. And within this, if I had more clients in there, or sorry, more people in here, under the Manage Participants option, I would be able to see who's on, see what they can do. And if I just close the chat window, under this More, so that was Manage Participants and More, you can lock the meeting once everyone you're expecting is in. And the value of this setting is that if you've got a very small team meeting and you want to have a very specific conversation about certain things, you don't want others to accidentally join if they happen to have the link, or join intentionally if they happen to accidentally have the link. So by locking the meeting, you can actually you can stop that from happening, because people with the link and the password could still get in if they've not been invited. In terms of the waiting room, you'll get a notification here as well that people are in the waiting room, and you can add or remove. Now, the waiting room has a great feature, because if you're running a scheduled session where you've got agenda items where presenters are going to come in at certain times, so someone at 10:15, someone at 10:30, someone at 10:45, the waiting room has a fantastic feature in there, and that you can actually have them join at any time and then add them to the meeting from the waiting room, so that they're sitting there as the meeting moves through. You can add them in. There's one more feature in here, and it's to restrict the call feature to allow record trusted participants only. I'm going to have to follow up on the comments there, because that was one thing that I have detected, that typically only the host can record by default. What they can then grant is other people in the meeting the ability to record, and you give that away. You don't want to give that to everyone, and you also want to be very careful about who is recording. If we skip back to the account settings, there is quite a bit of control at the top here for the recording. And the recording element is, so this again was under, once you've scheduled or joined a meeting, under account settings and under recording, you can actually remove that ability. So hosts you can make sure that hosts can't allow others to record locally, and you can also ensure you can set automatic recording to default, and you can prevent people from accessing. So what you could do if you're running a large organization and you do want to keep track of some of the types of conversations that have been had, if you've got a very clear structure, you can automatically record all meetings, but actually stop some of the people from playing them back. My big piece of advice on Zoom is make sure, particularly in an admin role, that you're familiar with the different settings within your account. This is the bit that will trip people up if they're not if they're not closely aligned with the settings. So they may not turn something on, or they may turn something off. And also definitely make sure that there's only a certain number of administrators in your organization. Just playing through this one quickly, what we can set up within here, within mine, there is an owner, an admin, and a member. Now there's only one person in my organization, so that's why I'm an owner. I've got full access. Admins, and I'm able to manage licenses and the like. Admins, slightly less. Members, just able to use it. So make sure you are adding people in and giving them the roles they need. Don't give everyone admin access. Just give people members access, but make sure there's enough people in your organization available to administer Zoom. So that was under the settings as you're trying to book a meeting in the client, under user management and role management. I'm Anthony McMahon, and this has been another episode of BizBytes Live. If you found the content useful, please subscribe or click follow. I'll be posting videos like this quite regularly. Thank you very much.